Tatum the drive. Tatum the finish. It is Banner 18. The mission demanded is mission accomplished.
What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell with a weekly episode of You Got Boston, live from my home in Boston. Just got back from All-Star Weekend in San Francisco. Sorry for the delay if there were people that were waiting to join. Just as I finished recording, I got a bloody nose, so that was what my delay was about. I meant to go 6 sharp. That's why I sat down at 6 o'clock sharp, I promise. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about All-Star Weekend and just my Celtics-related takeaways from All-Star Weekend, because I think that obviously there's a lot of media coverage. There's a million reporters in San Francisco, in Oakland, but at the same time, I think there's a lot to talk about that was more Celtics focused, because obviously that's the stories that I'm chasing down in San Francisco and Oakland is things related to the Celtics. So we'll share a little bit about that. And then we will also talk a little bit about WNBA prospects in Boston. So really exciting report from the Globe's Gary Washburn earlier today that Donnie Wahlberg and Michael Carter-Williams want to bring a WNBA expansion team to Boston, that the mayor and the governor have both offered their support. And there are a ton of teams right now that are in the mix for an expansion team. So right now, a ton of cities. So it's an exciting moment for the WNBA. It's an exciting moment for just women's basketball in general. And we'll see about whether that report, how much energy and momentum there is behind that report, because ultimately there are a lot of cities that want to see a WNBA team come to town, and most of them are not going to see it. But I'm a big proponent of a WNBA team in Boston. I think it would be awesome to see that type of engagement, to see that type of I think the city would rally behind it, is my personal opinion. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then also just wanted to chat about just where we feel the Celtics are at heading into the second half of the year. And it's ironic because on one hand, it's more than the second half. They've played over 52 games. And at the same time, I feel like because of the playoffs and you anticipate that they're going to have another deep run, it probably is actually accurately the half-point mark. So I always thought it was funny the All-Star break came, 2/3 into the season, more than a halfway point. But if you're going to make a playoff push, it ends up falling kind of smack in the middle there. So yeah, so we'll talk about all that. We'll go about 25 minutes today. And as always, feel free to put any questions in the chat, and I will be sure to go through all the questions today. And thank you for the well wishes. Yeah, I'm all good. I get a bloody nose pretty often, so it's not super unusual. Okay, so thanks, Tom, for tuning in. Favorite part of covering All-Star Weekend was on Friday. We had Jaylen Brown hosted an event with his new nonprofit called Oakland Exchange, in partnership with Oakstop, which is a nonprofit organization that is focused on kind of supporting Black-owned businesses and creators. And it was really interesting. We got to talk to Jaylen a little bit about it. I'm working on a big story on just Jaylen Brown's philanthropic efforts. So for me, and from a personal standpoint, it was just cool to be there. It was nothing like All-Star Weekend. It was in Oakland. It was a sneaker ball, so it was kind of like a fancy lunch with attendees and a lot of energy and momentum about just kind of addressing societal issues, social justice issues. And Jaylen was kind of in his element, and it was the least more fabricated, or not fabricated. It was the least corporate part of All-Star Weekend at all. And I think for me, from a reporting standpoint, it was really cool to see just the energy around his efforts. And he only spent 1 year of his life in that area. He went to Berkeley, UC Berkeley for 1 year when he played his freshman year in college. But then since then, he's been able to kind of just find energy and from that community. He really loved Oakland. He said it was a very impactful year. It was the year that kind of made him who he is today. So I really like that. I also just enjoyed, it was a lot of media buzz, so I can kind of share what All-Star Weekend is like. Basically, you have reporters from all around the world, more reporters than I've ever seen in my life, and anything, way more than the finals, way more than literally anything. And you have all the All-Stars are going at the same time for media availability. So for example, you might have Karl-Anthony Towns in one station. 10 feet away from him is Jalen Brunson. 10 feet away from him is Trae Young. So you have all these guys. They're all big stars, right? And they have 55 media members around them, and they have 10 minutes of media availability. So to get your question answered, which obviously everybody's there because they have a specific question, you have to literally yell over other people. And it's really yeah, it was for me from a reporting standpoint. Like I don't like being like the paparazzi. I don't like being like, oh, you tell me like whatever. But that was the only way to get your questions in. So I didn't mind doing that. Like I had I was writing some stuff about the WNBA. I'm doing a big story on just like the more difficult part about being famous, and I was trying to get that question in. But it's hard to be like interrupting somebody or talking over somebody, then you turn your head and it's like a little kid asking a question or a comedian or whatnot. So it was a little bit challenging from a reporting standpoint just to figure out how to not be like annoying, but also be able to get your questions in. And then I kind of figured out some hacks like Saturday night are when all the events are the dunk contest, the shooting contest, skills challenge, and all the players are made available after that. So if you wanted to talk to Jaylen Williams, for example, you were way better off talking to him after the All-Star game than during his like Saturday morning media availability. So it's kind of not that interesting of a thing, but ultimately I felt like that was like a little thing that I learned because it was my first time ever attending the All-Star game, and then definitely also my first time covering it because it's only my second year covering the NBA. So yeah, but overall it was an enjoyable experience. We had a lot of fun. We also had a media basketball game, and a lot of like big reporters were there. Chris Haynes, bunch of Warriors people, that are kind of on the ground there, and that was a lot of fun as well. So that was another highlight for sure. Question here about the Connecticut Sun. So just for context for people to know, the Connecticut Sun are owned by the Mohegan tribe. They're the only professional sports team that is owned by an indigenous tribe, and they're based in Uncasville, Connecticut. They are in the casino. They're in the Mohegan Sun Arena. They are not in a major media market. If you look at the other teams that have teams, other cities that have teams, you have the New York Liberty, you have the Los Angeles Sparks, you have these big time arenas that are usually in the same city where there's also an NBA team, with some exceptions like Seattle, but they're big time cities. Connecticut is in a different position. They're in a smaller city. They don't have their own facilities. They don't have their own practice facility. That stood out to me as stood out as a challenge as far as like recruiting free agents. People want to have like the women athletes want to have the same level of resources as their men counterparts, and even if it's not the exact same, like they wanted to be what they had in college, and for the most part, like this is not what they had in college. They went to facilities and schools, and they had much better offerings than what they have in Connecticut. So the Sun have not wanted to sell. They have no reason to want to move to Boston because they own the casino. So for them, it's like a financial thing that people come to the game, they watch the game, and then they go gamble and they go spend money on dinner and drinks and whatever. So from a business standpoint, it works for them. I don't think it necessarily works for the players as well, and I don't know that it necessarily works as much as it could. I think a team in Boston would have more energy behind it, but they can't be forced to sell. So at least right now, there's been no talk about that. They don't want to move. So I think there might get to a point where they feel the pressure and they feel like, okay, they have a really bad year next year and they can't even fill up the arena, which I could see that happening because right now they lost almost every rotation player from last year. If that happens and all of a sudden they're in this position where they're losing, nobody wants to play there because they don't have the same resources that other teams have, and they're not in a great media market as far as like endorsements or offer opportunities. I can understand why somebody would want to, why they might, maybe down the road they change their mind for like a really lucrative bid. Cleveland is going to be the 16th WNBA team by most reports. That was a $250 million bid. So these bids are exponentially rising. I would love to see a team in Boston. I think that there's the ingredients for it here, but logistically right now, like there's a completely different expansion bid that's taking place that doesn't have to do with the Connecticut Sun. And that being said, I think it would be challenging to have both of those coexist at the same time because one is in Boston and would be NBC Sports Boston, all that. Connecticut right now is also on NBC Sports Boston. Connecticut right now is the Celtics sister team. So it would be a little bit crowded, especially considering that a lot of major cities don't have any teams. In the South, there are very few teams as well. So we'll see, but that's kind of the synopsis for people who are curious. And I can share a little bit more about just kind of how this works, but that's the general gist. Question here about rumors that Kevin Durant will play for the EuroLeague. I haven't heard anything about that. I would be very surprised if he leaves the NBA anytime in the next few years. He's still one of the best players in the league. He's up there. So I think that, I'd be surprised if he wasn't able to find an NBA team. But I know people have, because he's such like a pure hooper, I think people are wondering if like maybe it's an accolade that he'll want to chase. But I don't think it's anything substantive, at least not any reporting that I've seen. I'll answer this question. Question here is, what is your plan to fix the All-Star game, please? I think every media member has now put their, put their hat in the ring as far as a potential solution. So I'll give my perspective. I'll just kind of throw it out there. I think first of all, there's something to be said about the fact that maybe it's okay that All-Star Weekend is not the greatest weekend of basketball. Like it might just be fine that it sucks. It might just be fine that it's a hard watch. Like I say this as somebody that sounded off. We did a garden report after the game, and somebody that really complained about just everything related to this team and just this game and the commercial breaks and everything. I thought it was a terrible product. Then I thought about it more and I was like, okay, even if it is a terrible product, like, is it the end of the world? Do we have to be so existential about it? I saw people suggested all sorts of things around putting home court in the finals on East versus West and making it so that, there's just really enormous stakes, or not inviting people back the following year. Like I've seen all sorts of things that are a lot more extreme, I guess. And my take is that I don't know that it matters so much that we have to now put home court in the finals in the All-Star game. Like it would be fun for that one game to be really intense, but do I really want home court to be determined by this one game that like most of the players on the team are not participating in? So like Tatum and Brown now have to be alongside a bunch of other guys like Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland and Karl-Anthony Towns. And like they're all on the same page trying to find all, I don't know that I love that idea. I think for me, get rid of all the frills. That's my solution. I don't know that it would work, but get rid of all the frills, get rid of all the music, the concerts, all that, and just instill a sense of like you're just playing pickup basketball. And even if the game is not that intense, play for 48 minutes, have the best players in the world out there. And some guys are going to set the tone, like Wemby, who was playing really hard. I even felt Jaylen Brown checked into the game and was like more engaged than most people defensively. But I think that the guys tried a little bit this year to make it a normal basketball game. And all of their efforts were squashed by all the off-court things that were happening. Like pregame, there's concerts, the introductions take so long. Like there's just so much happening. There's so many breaks. Everybody's talked about the Inside the NBA, like funeral they held that was a long break. Like I just felt like they weren't able to get in a good rhythm. And Tatum talked about it post game. He said like it was really hard after that to get back in the swing of things after that, a really long intermission. And so that would be I don't think I have like a brilliant like do all these extra things and put all these stakes on it, because frankly I don't think it's worth sacrificing something else. If you want to throw a bunch of money on the winner and like that's going to motivate them and somebody wants to sponsor that, be my guest. Like I know that ultimately, despite the fact they have a lot of money, like money's always a motivator. So if you want to say the winning team, every player gets $500,000 and somebody wants to sponsor that somehow, then fine, that would be cool. But ultimately, like I wouldn't want to put basketball stakes on it personally. And I think that maybe it just sucks and that's not the end of the world. And you have the rest of the year to have good basketball and those games matter more. If we're talking about like why do the finals suck, like if that was the reality that we lived in, like then I'd be like, okay, here's how we're going to fix the finals. But I think that you can kind of just accept the fact that All-Star Weekend just might not be great personally. So we'll see if that's the case. We'll see if, what changes. I don't think they're going to run it back with this Rising Stars thing, because I think people didn't like the format. The production was obviously terrible, but I think just in general, there were a lot of criticisms of like why we're seeing Donaldson Connect and Zach Edey right now, where we want to be seeing Devin, Tyler Hero and Jalen Brunson and guys that were named to the All-Star team who barely played because they lost in that first game. So they barely played. I like the snubs idea where you have like maybe 3 teams or a team of snubs and they're not considered all-stars. They get like an honorable mention or something and they just play against the all-stars. But I understand why logistically it's like you're going all the way to All-Star Weekend, but you're not an all-star. So it's kind of a weird situation. So I don't know. The WNBA had a great game last year. It was the U.S. team versus the all-stars that weren't on the U.S. Olympic team. And the non-Olympic team members really showed out and they were obviously motivated, had a chip on their shoulder. So it all made sense to me, at least from that standpoint. I know I've seen the European basketball fans. I think this is about the Kevin Durant point and appreciate the super chat. But yes, I think that it'd be cool if NBA players at the end of their career just went over there and just destroyed a little bit. But yeah. Thing in my top corner question it is a ukulele. It's not mine. It's my roommate's though. And then I'm seeing just some stuff here. A question about our pickup game. I had a pretty good shooting game. I don't know that I know how many points I had, but I was content with my effort. I was content with my performance. And then Derek here brings up the Kevin Hart piece. I felt like Kevin Hart kind of ruined a lot of the experience personally. As soon as they named him the MC for the tournament, I was like, okay, that's really annoying that there's going to be like a really loud comedian that's kind of almost becoming center stage. And I'm not like a huge fan of comedians in general. I think that people are funnier when they're not paid to be comedians. Like I think I'm like a pretty easy laugh. I laugh things all the time. I'm sure people that have seen me on like the Garden Report or whatever have seen that, but I just find like when you're watching a basketball game, it felt forced. I think it was irritating the players a little bit. There's a clip that maybe some people have seen of SGA where he just is really clearly irritated at Kevin Hart, who was like heckling him. So yeah, I thought that his presence was completely unnecessary. And please like and subscribe. Thank you, Ma, for the reminder always. You Got Boston is my YouTube channel. You can find I'm trying to do a weekly episode during the regular season and then more frequently during the off season. This is a good question. Did I dream of joining the WNBA when I was playing in college? So I played club in college, so I was not in the mix for playing in the WNBA. I did dream of playing in college, and I almost did, and then I got a better scholarship to go to D1 school where I wasn't going to be able to play. But as a kid, I dreamed of being in the NBA, honestly. Like that, I was raised watching like the Celtics, so I was like if I saw Celtics players, I'm like, that's what I want to be one day. Obviously, I was not going to be in the NBA. So the WNBA is something that I kind of grew into loving more and more as an adult, actually. And I wish that I'd watched it as a kid more because I think that I would have really enjoyed it. But it wasn't on the forefront of most people in my lives' mind the way that the NBA was. Question here about do you feel the All-Star Game was losing interest among fans? If so, what do you feel the NBA should change to help improve the fan experience for what was once known as a great weekend? I think I touched a little bit on this a few minutes ago, but I think that it just making it more about basketball. There's been a lot of buzz about a one-on-one tournament, which multiple players, Rachel Nichols was kind of going around asking players about whether they would participate in a one-on-one tournament. Multiple players said that they would. Whether or not they actually would, I think it's one thing to say something when it's a year away. It's another thing to actually put your money where your mouth is. And some of the players said they would, didn't even play at All-Star Weekend, right? So I don't know if they would, but Unrivaled just held it's a professional women's basketball league in Miami. Takes place 3 times, takes place for 9 weeks. It's 3-on-3, full court. They held a one-on-one tournament, and a lot of the stars didn't play. There were a lot of injuries mid-season. Obviously, some players aren't even in Unrivaled, so it wasn't like, Caitlin Clark wasn't in it, Asia Wilson wasn't in it, but you still had a lot of good talent. And honestly, I didn't really care that not everybody was in it because there were a lot of upsets, and it was really fun to just see players go one-on-one and try their best. And there was a lot of money on the line. They had a $200,000 cash prize, which is more than most players' annual salaries in the WNBA. So just imagine what that would be in the NBA. That would be like 30 million or something, or like 10 million, I guess, for the average salary. And they were awesome games. They really were super competitive. They were super fun to watch. And I thoroughly enjoyed just the experience of seeing players compete. Guards were guarding bigs. Nafisa Collier ultimately won that one, and then she talked about it in her post game. She said, we'll see if the men are willing to do it, but they probably won't be able to kind of put their ego aside. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's the general sentiment that people feel is that the NBA players are not going to want to be vulnerable. They're not going to want to be humiliated. Imagine, Almond Thompson beating Giannis in a one-on-one game where guys, that's not even really a good example, but I think there's a lot of these younger players could probably beat the veterans. All of a sudden Kevin Durant loses 12-0 and now it becomes like the social media frenzy around it and everybody's trolling him and all that. So I think the online culture is part of why they don't want to do it. But if you could get buy-in from the stars to actually do a one-on-one tournament with really substantial stakes on the line, like a lot of money probably is what it would have to be, and they really hooped and really competed against one another, and you could just watch those matchups, I think people would love doing that. And I think they need something really fresh too. So that's the big thing that I would love to see. I would love to see a one-on-one tournament. I think the women have paved the pathway with Unrivaled. There's a formula for how to do it. There's certainly ways that could be tinkered. I felt like that tournament, some things about it I loved, other things I didn't, but I think it would benefit in some capacity bigs because you can just be strong and go to the basket and get offensive rebounds. And then also shooters, winners ball typically. So if you keep the ball, it's, you can kind of get hot there. So there's a lot of different ways that it could be done, but I think that's one event that it would really end up kind of really helping the energy and excitement of the weekend. Is just giving it something new. Because I think we're just kind of seeing the same watered down things year after year. And that's why people really liked Steph and Sabrina last year. I felt like people really enjoyed their competition because it had never been done before. There had never been a WNBA versus an NBA player, and obviously 2 exceptional shooters, and it was a great battle. And I think this year had Caitlin Clark done one with Sabrina versus Clay and Curry, which was something that had been floated. I do think that would have been a huge hit, and Caitlin didn't want to do it, which I totally understand, and she'll probably do something at WNBA weekend, All-Star weekend, but I can understand why, this one felt kind of stale because there wasn't really much new. And honestly, Mac McClung was an awesome dunker, but I know a lot of people would rather see, I'd rather see Jaylen Brown go do less exciting dunks or see every team's all-star try in a dunk contest, even if they're bad, like even if they can barely dunk. Like it would just be more entertaining to watch the stars than watching like this exceptional YouTube dunker because you could just have like YouTube dunkers come in or like pro dunkers come in and do their own contest. So there's that piece of it as well. So we'll see what they come up with. I'm sure they're going to come up with something. They're never going to get rid of it because it's a huge moneymaker for the league. But I think I'm not surprised that people walked away feeling frustrated. I was covering it and I was getting paid to be there, and I still was like, this is frustrating. So I never wanted to take that for granted. Like it's always it's such a like blessing to be at these events and be able to talk to these players and experience it all. And I know how expensive tickets are to even just watch. But I did feel like I felt for the fans that were at home trying to like make the most of the experience because ultimately it wasn't the best I've seen. So, and I agree. I thought Jaylen and Jason both were pretty good in this game. I didn't rewatch it. I normally rewatch games at home, but this one I was like, I don't need to rewatch this. But I did stand out to me a little bit. And yeah, and I know everybody has their own thoughts. Some people probably are infuriated by it. I think some people just want to not talk about it anymore. It's not a huge deal. And then, yeah, I know a lot of buzz was around NHL's like four country thing. I don't know much about that, but countries could work. Giannis talked about how he wanted to see a world versus US game and how he thought that would be really exciting. So there's certainly an element there where like maybe you make the world team, even though like there's more US All-Stars than global, like you could come up with some format where it's now the world players going against US and there's like some pride on the table. They kind of went in that route, but then it wasn't completely clear that it was like world versus US. So we'll see what they come up with. And I'm somewhat curious, but not like that curious. So I guess we'll just see. And yeah, and I would love to do a WNBA podcast. I think sometimes I try to do them on here, but obviously the audience on here mostly wants to hear about the Celtics. But maybe that's something that I'll work out at some point because I do think that there's so much happening in the WNBA, and sometimes I'm like maybe I'll just do a WNBA episode. But then people start asking me Celtics questions, so we'll see. Maybe I'll do one like free agency roundup, just to talk about all the player movement that has happened. Or I can share some. I've been appearing on other people's podcasts. I can share some of those as well. But yeah, I think a lot of the stuff like really resonated. Like, I think the broadcast was kind of wild. I used to love Into the NBA. I know people have soured on them of late. I have also soured on them. I don't know if it's because I've gotten older and I'm in the media, so I view things through a lens of more like critical or thinking about like what's the actual ramifications of what they're saying, or if they've gotten more annoying. You can let me know in the chat if you like the Inside the NBA broadcast. I used to be like super bummed when I would watch a game and it was on ESPN. I'd be like, oh, I want to see the TNT guys. I don't feel that way at all anymore. Now, I mean, I usually watch games in person. But even so, I just feel like the tides have kind of shifted there. So yeah, and again, didn't love didn't mind the format. So we'll see. Okay. Going through some of these. Unraveled was super fun. That's another way to do it. Like putting a college team versus the NBA team, like the EuroLeague champions. You could put the NCAA champions, the EuroLeague champions, and the All-Stars. Like there's different ways you can get creative, but I think every year they're trying something new, so there's no sense of continuity. Every year it's like, are we buying into this or not? And then they use all this production stuff that just makes it even more dramatic. So, yeah. Blocker steal. That's interesting. This is an interesting one. Someone suggests here, what about changing the scoring where a blocker steal is worth a point? That could be cool because it would incentivize those plays that people want to see. Like a block at All-Star Weekend is like electric. So I can understand why people. That's an interesting thought. I haven't heard anybody say that. And then Mahir asks, any thoughts on players announcing late that they're not playing? I kind of understand that, but I think it ruins the excitement and also allows players to stat pad your All-Star count, which is unfair. So I think this was just a bummer because you're still an All-Star if you don't play. If you were named an All-Star, you're still going to be considered an All-Star even if you're not able to play in the game. So like Giannis, Anthony Davis, those guys are still All-Stars this year. So it's kind of just like give somebody else a chance. Like I know everybody talked about Norman Powell, but it's really freaking cool to be 31 years old and to be adding 10 points on your previous season. And he should have been an All-Star if LeBron wasn't going to play. Anthony Edwards wasn't going to play. Like, have somebody else, a bonus. Like there's a lot of very talented players. There probably should be more all-star slots just considering how much talent there is in the league. So yeah, I would have liked to see more stars rather than less. And I think if there were guys that weren't sure if they were going to be able to play or not, I kind of think if you're like, if it's a couple of days before and you're still like, there's a 50-50 chance, maybe just have somebody take your spot because it is such a limited and exclusive thing. And you can still come and hang out. Like Giannis had a big presence at All-Star weekend. His mic'd up video was great and like he was super engaged and all that. So I do think like, yeah, it's helpful to see those guys around, like even if they're not going to play, like it helps their brand. Giannis did a big press conference, but there's no reason why they should take a spot if they're not going to play. And that's why some guys were definite eliminations. Other guys like LeBron and Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards wasn't even announced before the game. All of a sudden, it was like he just never played. So I don't love that. I think there's a way to do that. Yeah. Okay, question here, Celtics related question. So let's do a couple minutes of Celtics before we wrap up here. Appreciate all the All-Star stuff. It is a kind of front of mind for everybody because obviously it just happened and I was there, so I'm definitely always happy to chat about it. But who do I think will get the final roster spot? I think it's going to just be a converted two-way. So everybody knows right now we're at 14 players on the Celtics. The 14th roster spot went to Torrey Craig, who made his debut on, was it Wednesday? Yeah, before the break. Yeah, Wednesday. So I thought he was great. I thought that he's a great addition. It's obviously really early, very easy to be excited when the guy went 2 for 2 and they had a blowout win, but I think that he was a good spot. But they have one more spot available for the All-Star, for their roster, not All-Star. And I would guess that it's going to be one of the two-way contracts converted. Most likely Drew Peterson is my guess, just because he's the one that spent the most time in Boston this year. And then maybe J.D. Davison could be one potential candidate. Obviously, he's just finished his third consecutive two-way deal with the Celtics. He just hasn't been spending time in Boston. And I think for him to be converted, like they would have to really value his potential contributions on the actual Boston Celtics. And to me, it's like if they value that and they think that there's a pathway forward for him, I would have guessed that he would spend more time in Boston. So I don't know necessarily if there's validity to that. Everybody's really happy about his performances in Maine, but we just haven't seen them give him that next leap. So we'll see. But I think if I had to guess right now, it would be number 1 is Drew Peterson, number 2 is J.D. Davison. One of those guys I think is going to get converted before the playoffs. Anton Watson is the third two-way. I don't see a world where he gets converted this year. It's his first year with the organization. Other two guys have been spending multiple years. And I think if they need anything, they need a backup guard, honestly, because Torrey Craig's another backup wing. They cut J.D. Davison for him, so they're down one guard, which they replaced with a wing. So, sorry, not J.D. Davison. They cut Jaden Springer, excuse me, my former favorite players. How could I even forget his name? But they cut him in for Torrey Craig, and so that's kind of how that one worked out. So I think that's what's going to happen, but I think it'll be very much in the last hour. And I can see, I can see why, it's a money thing, like they want to save the money, but there's also the possibility that they might just pull somebody at the last hour that's, maybe they leave it open. Like there's a lot of different ways that it could go. It's not as obvious as it was last year. Last year it was like very clear Neemias Queta was going to get that spot. He'd spent a lot of time in Boston. He was an impactful rotation player. It was almost like when are they going to do it? So Drew's the one, I guess, the closest he's gotten some rotation minutes. That's going to be my pick. And this is, a little off topic because I know we're talking Celtics for a few minutes, but this is a good point, Derek, about just the dunk contest not being that much of an injury risk. Jaylen did last year and had a great playoff run afterwards. Okay, I'm just reading all these comments here to see if there's any questions. Okay, question here about how do you think Joe Mazzulla has done midway through the season, especially in recent weeks? I think Joe has done a good job. Ultimately, it's really hard to evaluate coaching like at a granular level. I know a lot of people will have critiques of rotations. They'll have critiques of like the last play of a game. Those are the two things that I feel like are the most visible, where you can be like, that was Joe's call. And even the last play of a game, maybe he wrote something up and they didn't execute, right? So I don't know. But generally speaking, like I think the biggest thing is that there's clear buy-in from this team for Joe Mazzulla. Like everybody is bought into the system. They're bought in even when they're losing a little bit. Even during tougher moments where they were a 500 team for a few weeks, I felt like the confidence in this group never wavered. I never felt like there was internal strife or ego clashes or things like that. And there are certainly egos on this team. I think everybody would admit that. So my perspective on Joe is that if the locker room is at a good place, that's the biggest indication that he has done a good job. And that's maybe not the first thing people think about. People are thinking more about schematic things, but that stuff I think has been a strength of his. And honestly, like when you have a team full of stars, the way the Celtics do, and you just came off a championship, obviously they're good enough to repeat, right? The bigger question is like, are all those pieces going to come together the way they did last year in the same way? And if they don't, it could be a personnel thing. It could be an internal kind of chemistry type of thing. So I think he's done a good job. I also, from a substitution standpoint, like I always like seeing bench players a lot. Like I think that just in the regular season, lessen the load on your stars. So I was enjoying, like, for example, when Jaden Springer was getting extended minutes, I think you could play those guys a little bit more. Like, I would rather see Neemias Queta a little bit more right now, even if it costs them a couple positions here and there, because I do feel like he's a guy with a really high ceiling, a really high upside. That being said, I understand Luke has been great. So it's like, I understand why you want to go with the guys that are working. But I think my one critique of Joe would be, if you are going to change anything, it would be just giving those end of bench players a little bit more of a consistent opportunity. And not just sometimes like Baylor will go in for 2 minutes. And it's like, okay, but he's not going to really get confidence and comfortable in that span. But he's done, he has given them those opportunities in various moments. Everybody's gotten a chance this year. Jordan Walsh earlier in the season, Queta had a stretch there. So everybody's gotten a chance. I think I wish that he went back to the guys a little bit more than he does, just because in the playoffs, like they're not going to play. We already know that. So it's just like, why not? Yeah, that's my thought. And then speaking of Baylor, like Baylor is a guy that has looked really, really good in the G League. He's honestly been one of the most impressive, like all-around players in the G League. But he hasn't looked great in his very limited minutes at Boston. I don't extrapolate too much when it's such limited minutes, but I will say, like, he looks like he doesn't have the same confidence that he has in the G League. Same with JD Davison. So obviously you're not going to, especially when he comes in and he's the fifth option in an offensive unit, that he's just trying to basically not make a mistake and maybe hit an open shot if he has an opportunity. It's just a different mindset than when you're coming in the G League and they're playing through you and they're giving you a lot of opportunities. But still, I just I've enjoyed watching a lot in the G League. I think that he's gonna continue to evolve, and I wouldn't be surprised if next year he gets a bigger opportunity in Boston. But yeah, this year feels like it's still more of a G League type season for him. This is a good question. What's your best player comparison? I would say, I've said this before, I think it's Max Strus, in the sense where it's like you're supposed to be a shooter, but if you actually look at his numbers, they're not like that great. But they're not bad, but that would be mine. I think he's like a solid player who is like a shooter, but like if you look at the splits, they're like not that good. That's me. I think my overall 3-point shooting percentage probably wasn't like super high most of my life, but I put together some really good shooting performances. So at my best, certainly. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up here in a minute, but I'm just gonna answer one more question. Someone here wrote, "How do you feel his tools translate?" I don't know who this is about. Oh, this is about Baylor. Okay, yeah. Last thing about Baylor. So I think that he has a really good feel for the game, like more so than honestly a lot of NBA players. He's kind of everywhere at the right place at the right time. He is a great rebounder. He's a great passer. He can kind of do it all. There's not like a major hole in his game. My biggest challenge is my biggest question around him is just like how quick he is and if physically he can play at the speed of an NBA player. Reminds me a little bit of like questions we had about Sam Hauser early in his career of like defensively, is he going to be able to keep up? He's pretty strong. Yeah, that's my biggest thing is just from a physical standpoint, if he's going to be able to just kind of hold his own defensively. I think offensively he's going to be completely fine. And I think he plays really hard. He really, like, how hard he plays really stands out to me. So yeah, we'll see. Record prediction for the Celtics. Yeah, he is. Yeah, he definitely has less length than Sam, but he's strong. And I guess he's not that young. I keep saying for his age, it's not for like he's like 23, 24. So, yeah. Last one I'm going to do here is, what's your record for prediction for Celtics for these last 27 games? Right now, what is the Celtics record right now? I can't even remember. It's been a while since I've updated their record. Let's see. 39-16. They have 27 games left. I think they're going to go 20-7 in these last 27 games. So they're going to finish just one game short of 60. That's going to be my prediction. 59 games. That's going to be my guess. We'll see if that's accurate. I think they're going to have a strong close here. They have the third easiest schedule remaining, which is kind of interesting because I do feel like they've kind of been going for I feel like they've been in an easy stretch all year, but I guess that's kind of what happens when you're in the East and a lot of teams were not the team they were supposed to be. But they have the third easiest stretch remaining here. And ultimately that's going to play a role, but yeah, I think they're going to be consistent here. 20-7. You can let me know in the comments what you think their record will be over these last 27 games, and we'll see if anybody gets it right. Maybe I'll send, I'll send a winner. Whoever comments the right exact record, I'll send you some prize. So feel free to guess. And then before I log off here, I just wanted to plug. Thank you so much, Tom. I do these Celtics notebooks on CelticsBlog.com where I really kind of go in depth about just things that are said, things that I'm noticing from being on the ground at all these cities because I've been on the road for most of the year. So yeah, just feel free to read those if you want to. If after a game you're like, I want to know more of what was said, but I don't really feel like watching like the whole post game or I don't want to read like a million articles. It's kind of like a one-stop shop where you can kind of pick up the highlights of everything. So we do a post-game show on CLNS Media, the Garden Report after every game. Always would love to have as many of you join. I recognize a lot of the names from that. And then also I have a notebook on CelticsBlog.com. So please like, subscribe, and comment on the YouTube video, not in here, comment on the YouTube video what you think the final record is going to be. That way I have a record of it because the chat here will go away. Enjoy the rest of your night, everybody. And I'll be in Philly on Thursday, so I'll have some post-game coverage from Philadelphia coming right up.